let's talk about the Saints' new defensive coordinator. You think with the way this past season went for the Saints, really bad on offense, kind of lethargic at times, anemic, whatever your favorite adjective is that's negative and kind of condescending, that's probably what you'd use for the Saints offense. That's the way it kind of went. And yet, looking at the staff, they're making wholesale changes at defensive personnel. Ryan Nielsen, co-defensive coordinator, he's now the full-time, drop the defensive coordinator of the Atlanta Falcons. Chris Richard, the other co-defensive coordinator, who's done a really good job with the DBs over the last, I'd say, 2 seasons, he's no longer in the picture. Instead, he's moving elsewhere. Doesn't have a job yet, but I'm sure he'll land somewhere. He's a really well-respected coach in the NFL. So they're gone. What happens next? Well, the Saints turn to an old friend of Dennis Allen's. They hired Joe Woods as their defensive coordinator. Now, this hire really ruffled a lot of feathers on Saints Twitter. And I think there are some arguments to be made why people can understand getting frustrated. But I think there's an important thing to kind of note when we have this conversation. So first off, who is Joe Woods? Well, he spent the past 3 seasons as the Cleveland Browns defensive coordinator. And according to advanced metrics and just looking at it, after he was fired, they were ranked 20th in points allowed and 14th in yards allowed. Kind of put that in comparison with the Saints. The Saints were 9th in points allowed and 5th in yards allowed. So obviously Saints defense was better than the Browns defense. Not really surprised by that. We saw the way the Saints defense, particularly in the last 2 months of the season, really came on strong. So anyway, Joe Woods comes in. He's got experience. He's worked with the Broncos. More importantly, he's got the connection with Dennis Allen. They worked together in Oakland. At that time, he was the DB's coach while Dennis Allen was the head coach. And people hear that, and the immediate thing is panic, right? I joked on Twitter, I called them the Oakland Saints. And I think that joke will probably continue for a little bit, especially since Dennis Allen hasn't really proven he can be a winner yet. That said, while everyone's kind of frustrated and worried about the future of the Saints defense now that Joe Woods and Dennis Allen are the two running this thing, here's where I say, just relax for a second. The defense will continue to be run by Dennis Allen until he's no longer the head coach, whenever the hell that day is. But until then, it's Dennis Allen's defense, which means everyone else is playing a role in this with him being kind of the featured guy. So Joe Woods is probably going to come in and have a really, really big emphasis on DBs. That's what he's done, and that's his specialty. The Saints would be wise to have someone else come in and kind of help out with the run game because, man, there were times where that Browns defense got gashed in the run game this past season, and they'll go from there. So I do think the immediate reaction is, this is horrible. What a bad hire. And I'm not saying it's a great hire by any stretch of the imagination. So I want to make that abundantly clear. What I am telling you, though, is because Dennis Allen's a head coach and because Dennis Allen's primarily a defensive guy, he's probably going to have that side of the ball straightened out regardless. But he wanted to make changes. It had to be in his vision. And you know what? It kind of, in a way, makes sense because you lose Ryan Nielsen to the Falcons, right? That's something that's kind of out of your control, okay? Because DA still wants to call plays. Nielsen gets to call plays in Atlanta. If Chris Richard is like, hey, all right, full-time defensive coordinator, I want to be the guy calling the plays, and DA says no, then it kind of makes sense. Joe Woods is probably coming in knowing he's not calling defensive plays. He's playing a minor role in assisting something. Or he is kind of the backup guy. Like, he's not coming in to call the shots. And I think that's where fans, it's easy to get frustrated. Lord knows I get frustrated an awful lot of times with this current regime. But I don't think this is the day to do it because this is his side of the ball. And if he butchers this side of the ball, well, guess what? He's out of here after next season anyway. And I think this is what this boils down to before I kind of go on to the next subject, which is Derek Carr. This is the only thing I'll say for Saints fans we're feeling justified, and it's not in a good way. The offense was terrible last year, 19.4 points per game. The defense was solid, like I said. 9th in points allowed, 5th in yards allowed. So they did their thing. That's a top 10 unit. Offense was terrible. All the changes right now are being made on defense, none on offense. I mean, they're running this staff just pretty much the way it was. They're bringing it back. And I know the counter argument is, well, if the Saints try to get a new OC or they try to get a new, assistant coach on offense, they're in this line of, hey, there's a lot of job openings, and who are you going to get? You can't always get who you want when there's other and better opportunities out there. And on one level, I totally understand that because there is logic to that. On the other hand, it's like you couldn't even at least try to make a move or make it seem like you wanted to make a move. That's where the frustration comes in. So I do think if Dennis Allen's trying to kind of win people's trust over this offseason, it's not going well, but it's still really early in the offseason. He's still got time to turn around, but it is fascinating, and I use that word lightly, to see the defensive staff getting overhauled and the offensive staff, it's kind of the just keep doing what you're doing type of mentality. But again, we'll see what happens and we'll go from there.